Thank you for joining us, our first ever digital design user group meeting. And let me just take care of something here. Okay. I'm going to continue to admit people as we go. So just if I look a little distracted, it's just kind of taking care of that. So yeah, so once again, thanks everybody for joining. It's awesome. And our intention for the group for this event is to create a forum where we can just share technology ideas, right? The intent is it's not an alias gig. It's not focusing on one particular tool over the other, rather just kind of looking at what the latest and greatest technology is. And it may be not just technology, maybe a particular workflow that we see or things like that. So we're making it open, which is cool. It's going to be totally unbiased, not going to be a sales pitch or any of that kind of thing. It's strictly let's share ideas, and kind of goes back to like the old user groups, when you used to go to an event, they'd have a session at SIGGRAPH or whatever.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. Yeah. Okay.
Is that Rich? Hey, Rich, can you mute your mic?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just going back to that whole thing, a user group, but a user group that is not focused on one particular technology or one subject matter, but the focus or the foundation is digital design. Yeah. Just bear with me, hold on. Right. Let me let these folks in. And you still can see my screen, right? Okay, cool. So the topics and the subject matter are chosen by everyone, and it's open, right? You can be a participant as little or as much as you want, right? But in the last 6 months, Diane has done a fantastic job of just kind of sending out surveys to just see what the vibe is, what people are looking for as far as what a subject matter is. So she's compiled these surveys, but they're not static, right? We'll continue to ask for your feedback. And if you have any recommendations, format or whatever, or how we can make it better, let us know. You can either email me or Diane. It's your call. So Diane, any input on that subject that you want to talk about?
No, only that I promise not to send you too many more surveys. But as Mike mentioned, if you want to, provide any feedback, please do. And again, thanks so much for taking the time to provide your feedback prior to the meeting to help us get organized.
Yeah, so our we're going to do these virtually, like we're doing them every 3 months, so every quarter, 1 hour long, right? So taking a little bit longer to get this one started, just kind of giving you back history. But as we proceed in future, we're just going to dive right in, and hopefully you can carve an hour of your time out every 3 months to see what the latest and greatest is. I think we've got things lined up in future. We're looking at an Unreal presentation potentially for the next session, and then potentially doing something live. Not sure, right around the LA Auto Show, but if not, we'll do it virtually. But Barry Kimball's got some really interesting ideas of what's going on with the next version of Alias, so that might be subject. But there again, I'm not defining it. You guys let us know what you think is relevant. Yeah. So our first presenter is Odie, and he'll give you the pronunciation of his full name. We all know him by Odie, and I think everybody in the industry knows him by Odie. But Andrew, kind of saw a lot of Odie's Blender videos recently, and we've had Odie do some training for us as well. And there again, just not trying to be too biased, but if you need Blender training, just let us know, because we have capability of doing that. But Odie's going to talk just about his workflow. He's an Alias user. He's an Alias cast guy. He can maybe give you a little bit of background of what his expertise is, but he uses Blender in conjunction with other tools, not just kind of its standalone tools, which I think is kind of a unique workflow. So, anyways, without further ado, please welcome Odie.
Yes, thank
So,
you.
Odie, I'm going to
Hello,
start.
everyone.
Right?
Yeah, and I will share my screen. Wait a minute.
We're getting a little feedback from other microphones. So if you can mute your mic, unless you have if you're getting ready to ask a question, just unmute. But if you keep it on mute, that would be great. All right, Odie, thanks.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, so
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Mike briefly introduced me. My name is Odie Loyer. That's the full pronunciation. So yeah, Mike asked me to do a talk about Blender, and since I'm constantly talking about it to anyone I meet, I obviously said yes. And I don't really know who I have in front of me. If you have experience or not with Blender. If you never used it, I really hope that this will convince you to start with it. If you are already a user, I hope you will learn things and that you will be motivated to dive into more stuff with what Blender has to offer. One of the things I'm quite certain though is that we are all from automotive design field, and that's why I did a fast car, because I know that we all like that. The purpose of it is to have a nice demo models for the different features and workflows that I want to show you. So yeah, there's a challenge here. I expect most of you also to be from the US, and whether it's East Coast or West Coast, I guess it's around lunchtime, maybe just after, maybe just before. So I need to keep it interesting. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions if it's possible at the end of the presentation. That would be the best. But otherwise, just stop me. Wait. Okay. So the menu, very simple. I don't want to make a boring presentation about what is polymodeling and how it differs from NURBS. You probably know that already. So we start with a simple introduction about who I am, what I did, my journey with Blender, and then we'll talk about the crazy growth that Blender had recently, what helped it and what made it tougher, and then we'll go to the cool part where we see the amazing stuff that Blender has to offer, and especially to car design. There will be examples, there will be cool features, and there will be use cases. Then I'll give you my vision of what the future of Blender will be made of and how it will still be relevant for us, showing you again some use cases and some stuff that are in development. And I'll finish with the main takeaways from all the presentation. Then if you have any questions, again, you're more than welcome to ask them. I can even start like Blender up if you need some live demo of something. Yeah, let's go. So very quickly about me. I know some of you in the people already, but probably most of you never heard of me. So yeah, just call me Odie. That's much easier. And previously, I was a digital sculptor at Koenigsegg in Sweden, where I stayed almost 3 years. I started there as an intern, worked and learned with great mentors such as Sasha Selipanov and Chris Cyrulewski. And in the end, I ended up leading the modeling department there, which was super interesting. And I was doing mainly alias, working on concept, aero development, A-class. But I still kept pushing my Blender workflow and knowledge all these years, whether at work or on the side. And then I recently left Koenigsegg to pursue other projects with one of my colleagues from there, Esa Mustonen. And we're now starting our own small studio from the Netherlands, where we provide stuff like early design ideation, final design surfaces, and everything in between. About my Blender journey, it's been this year 13 years that I'm using it. I started when I was quite young, and it took I really took my time to learn it, but following how it grew was really interesting, and I hope I can bring more value in that sense. I'm also a Blender teacher, as Mike said. I gave courses about it. And one thing I love to do as well is to come up with new tools for Blender, whether it's scripts or materials or anything, anything that can help me being more efficient, basically. And usually I like to share those with the world. Yeah, enough about me. Now let's talk about Blender. And I just want to mention the crazy growth that there was recently. Blender is quite old. It started with one guy with some industrial design background that started coding it for his job. And 25 years later, almost everyone knew it. It's now almost 30 years old. Here you can see two screenshots of like the version I started with and the latest version. So there's 13 years between those two versions. It really came a long way. But for me, the most important year recently was 2018, at least for our industry, because that's where Blender released the 2.8 version, which was full of groundbreaking features, especially on the rendering side. And nowadays, like Blender is almost a standard in a lot of industries. It's great, especially for small studios that don't have to pay for the full set of tools. It's used a lot by game artists, animation people, and design now. So yeah, but this sudden interest, it really took time to grow and to get where it is today. And to me, there's one specific reason that is why, and that's also one of Blender's best assets, which is the fact that it's free, and it's not only free, but it's also open source. And that for many people meant that everything you do is public and does not belong to you, which is not the case. And I just want to explain that because I think it's interesting and good to know that aspect. So yeah, there is that saying goes, if it is free, then you are the product. But that doesn't apply to Blender at all. The fact is that Blender being open source means that everyone can see what's under the hood. And if they want, they can help by fixing some code, coming up with new features, writing documentation, anything. And thanks to this, bug fixing in Blender is actually extremely good, and Blender is very, very stable because there's this public portal that is available where you can report bugs, see what's being worked on, what are the changes made to the code, etc. And it's very impressive to see how big and well organized it is. And this great aspect of Blender is actually very well protected because the open source license it has is very strict. So any code you write that interacts with Blender core has to comply with open source. Plus, Blender is a foundation, independently funded, which means that no one can buy them and suddenly make the software closed source, or you have to pay for it. So don't expect to see a Autodesk Blender anytime soon. And their main goal for that is to ensure that anyone has access to creative freedom in the 3D field, which I think is really cool. But enough about the least entertaining part. Now we can start to look at cool stuff and what makes Blender so amazing. So obviously there's a lot of stuff, but I will focus on what it can be used to design a car. And the main thing for me is the fact that Blender is basically a one-stop shop. You have everything there, from modeling to rendering, animation, scripting, everything. It's a very complete software, which makes it very efficient for ideation process. You don't need to export data around. You can just develop your idea until you have something like visually compelling. And without even leaving the software, you can just present that directly. The only thing it doesn't have for us is a proper NURB support, or more specifically, a trimmed NURB support, because it has very, very basic NURBS features, but it's basically, you can create a surface and that's it. There's nothing to intersect, to align, nothing. And this code remained untouched since the 90s, which seems to be a common thing in NURB software. So it's not usable for that. And this excludes the A-class part, but the tools it offers are still enough to go from basically nothing to a car in very short time. That's why I try to do this, to prove that with this car that I made for the presentation. Yeah, and also the ecosystem is so vast that even for a niche field like ours, you can find people creating simple but really time-saving tools. And there's a lot of good examples of how you can leverage Blender's ability, but one I really like is Rashid Tagirov. He's a designer at Alfa Romeo, and he's doing super nice work with Blender. His process is to bring a sketch, a very, very simple one with a strong intention, and then he just models the vehicle directly from Blender. And from there, he also adds material and lighting, and that really helps him setting a strong mood and identity, which I find very cool. And it's kind of the essence of what we are doing. Like what he does is in the end very, very close to his sketch and his intention. And the process is easy, it's fast, it's efficient, and yeah, the output is just great. He went even further on this project, where on top of modeling the thing, he also animated this cute little vehicle going up a mountain. And for me, that really shows like the power of Blender, because sorry, there's someone talking. There's someone that we can hear.
That was the presentation about how to use Blender.
Let me see, Odie, if I'm gonna
I'll switch up
I'm gonna mute everybody except you.
Yeah.
Unless that person whose mic is open can turn it off, but let me work on that, okay?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, this process that he has is really good, because it's not only about the shape of the car, but it's also like what mood you can set for it and what story you can tell with it. And yeah, all of this freedom in storytelling is enabled by also very down-to-earth tools and workflows, which we're going to discover now. And the most important for me is the non-destructive workflow, which is the main idea behind all the modeling that Blender is offering. So it's based on this idea of stacking up modifiers, which will alter the shape of your model without you having to suffer from those modifications. So the most simple and obvious example of that is if you're modeling a car, you only control one half with big squares that you can modify. Just so you know, the screenshots are from Blender. It's just that I like the shading of Alias. I like the contrast of it, so I just put it in Blender. But yeah, that's just to show my point. So you would add a modifier that just does the mirror, and then you can still control only one half of the car, and this will be it will also translate to the other side without you having to do anything. And then same for smoothing with the subdivision modifier, which again doesn't change anything for you. You still have those big polygons that you change. And obviously most 3D software have a way to deal with symmetry and smoothing. But we will see that you can do much more and go much more further with this stacking idea. And these modifiers make the modeling extremely flexible and powerful, and you can really get complex output from simple output, which is what Blender is about for a lot of things. So everything is automatically refreshed and tweakable with the settings in the modifier settings. A real life application of that is if you have to do something, if you have to model something circular like a rim. In Alias, it's a pain to have to mirror the half spoke you are working on and then duplicate through another menu. And even worse than that, having to deal with instances if you're brave enough to use those. So here you can simply have a modifier taking care of mirroring the part of your rim, and then you duplicate it around the center of the wheel, and you're good to go. Each modifier takes the previous one as an input, which means that the order is very important, but it's also giving you more flexibility on the outputs that you will get. In this example, I didn't have any idea of where I was going. There was no sketch, nothing. I just knew that I wanted to make a 7-spoke rim and that it had to be Aston Martin-ish. And having this direct feedback made such a difference to evaluate the design and know if I was heading in the correct direction. And I love Alias, but having to do that there would have been a very different experience. And yeah, that's if you want to iterate on something. But the good news is there's also tools to polish and make things look nice. And my favorite for that is the shrink wrap. This one takes one geometry and make it match to the shape of another geometry. So you can just duplicate your closed model of a car, add some subdivision to it, and shrink wrap it to the other one. Because if you just model your split lines and everything, you will have really poor reflections. But just by using the shrink wrap, as you will see here, you get very nice reflection. You don't lose the quality, but you still keep those details that you want to add. Yeah, and you can get really clean results without having to care about the topology as much, at least for the model that you cut, since you anyway shrink wrap each of its vertices to the nice and clean one. And you have some nice little features that Blender has to enable that, like vertex weights, that lets you control the influence of that modifier on each control point of the mesh. But we'll talk about that a bit later. Yeah, and that's very useful to just have something clean to show people, because these kind of details bring a lot to the look of the car. But it's also very nice if you just want to add small details without compromising the main surfaces. Like here, I just showed the example where I'm snapping the side view mirrors onto the body and shrink wrap the base of the stem just to have a 177 vibe to them. And only the first row of the geometry, like only the first row of CVE is affected, so that the overall shape of the side view mirror remains as it was, and only the bottom of the stem gets smoothly integrated to the door. The last modifier here is a data transfer, which is a fancy last touch, so that the normals of the body and the stem are matching, which removes some artifacts that you could have in the reflection. A note on the shrink wrap, the whole shrink wrap thing, as great as it is, the problem is that it doesn't allow you to export to alias subd or any other subd-based workflow behind. The reason being that the shrink wrap happens after the subdivision modifier. So it works with high poly data, which you really don't want to import into alias subd, since this would create thousands of small surfaces. And for rendering purposes, though, you can totally export the high poly model directly to VRED, Keyshot, or Unreal Engine, any external render engine. But the question is, why would you even bother switching software for visualization, where you can have not one, but two amazing render engine within Blender by default? That was one of the main features of this famous 2.8 release of Blender in 2018. Which was shipping a ray traced and a real-time engine directly in Blender. So here you can see the difference between the two. Eevee on the left is the real-time one, and Cycles on the other side is the more traditional ray tracing engine that you would expect on any generalist 3D software. So there's no intention for Blender to get rid of the ray traced one. It's just nice to have a real-time engine letting you visualize your work nicely without having to wait, basically. And I really think that automotive design can benefit a lot from this particular feature of Blender. And the example that you see here is not even pushed at all. Like, I didn't take time to bake any indirect lighting or reflections and whatnot, no UVs or anything. This is just enabling 2 or 3 features in the rendering settings, and that's the result that you get just outside of the box. So it's very quite good. And a really nice feature about Eevee is also that you can work while it's active. So you can get full access to all the tools, the gizmos, the interface elements, on top of having your nice reflections, your cool materials. And for me, more than just comfort, it's extremely valuable to just judge the design that you're producing, as you get a very clear idea of which part will be in which material, which one will be dark. Like on this car, for instance, having the carbon fiber floor for the car was really important to tweak the stance and make sure that the areas of shadows were helping the design and not working against it. So I really see a lot of values in Eevee for like real-time review as well. If you're working with a mostly shaded model, you don't need 5 minutes to prepare a review to show the car in different angles. You don't even need a camera to be set up or anything. You can just start Eevee and just rotate around your car and show it to whoever. And if you really need high quality renders, you simply switch to Cycles and you're good to go. And the perfect thing there is that the material system is exactly the same used by the two engines, which means that you don't need to change anything to the materials. And these materials are actually my next point, because I think that this shading system is a work of art. So like a lot of things in Blender, and you will see that it's node based. So you simply need to just connect boxes together, which is not new. Like a lot of rendering engines have that, but those are really giving you a low level control, and it lets you play with just mathematical function and everything to output realistic material behaviors in a way that is very comfortable. The example right here that you're seeing, you can see the node tree that I did to achieve the result that is just under it. So that's for the carbon fiber. And it looks very complex with all of those boxes, but it's actually not that much. And yeah, if math is not your thing, you can just bring in some images and work from that. And even to those, you can apply modification on the contrast, the colors, the value levels, absolutely anything. But personally, I really like to do everything procedurally, so just with math, because this can lead to a lot of flexibility. Like here, you can see the carbon fiber I was showing previously, and no images means that you can get virtually infinite zoom. But you can also define exactly the kind of control that you want. So on this material, for instance, you can change the pattern of the carbon. You can go with a 1x1, 2x2, 4x4 with weaving of the fiber, basically. You can also tweak stuff like the curvature of the carbon. The goal there was to mimic what Koenigsegg does with like they send the panel so that until you reach the fiber, they call that naked carbon. So I wanted to get this effect, and in the end, you can also go in the other direction and just have a much more like curved fiber. And obviously, you can play with the clear coat and this kind of stuff. And making this kind of materials is basically a process of just understanding what does a light do when it encounters that material in real life, and just try to do the same, but thanks to the amazing progress that we have in computer graphics. If you're more of a just visual person and you don't like math, you may like another feature that is very underrated in my opinion, and that is the Compositor, which is a post-production engine that you can automate thanks to nodes again. This one is more of a quirky one. Mainly mention it because I think it's underrated and I like it a lot, but also the fact that the latest version of Blender 3.5 is now offering it on the GPU, which is quite a big deal because it means that now you can have all of these effects in real time and in the viewport. And that's a really nice way to tweak the mood of your visual without having to jump to Photoshop or anything. You can just do simple post-production directly inside of Blender. And here I did a bit of extreme examples. Obviously, you wouldn't go that far, but I like to just add a bit more contrast and maybe some chromatic aberration. And then all the visuals that you output are a bit nicer than what you would get normally. Yeah, and now it's time to talk about the part where I think most people will be thinking that this is not for them, but I really love the scripting interface of Blender. I think this is a really good aspect of it. And when you start to discover it, it's actually a huge part of Blender. It's really developer focused, which I really like. And it's surprisingly easy to do your own tools in Blender. The main reason being that it's based on Python, which is one of the easiest language to learn. Plus it has a massive community. And the connection to the Blender core is very rich and lets you access a lot of actions from Blender. And most of the time, making a tool or making a script just means creating a panel with a button that activates a set of simple actions. It's never like building something with, I don't know, the camera and the shaders and stuff. It's just stuff that you could do by clicking. You just ask a button to do those 10 things for you. And if you're an alias user, you know how amazing the marking menus are. I really think it's one of the best features they have, and how fast they make your modeling. And for me, that was one of the things I wanted to have in Blender, and that's one of the best addition I have to my workflow. So I had that in Kiska because one of the guys there scripted it, but I redid it myself to just have my own and understand how to do it. And it's not that difficult because you already have what Blender calls pie menus. So you just have to take those menus and write which action you want to connect to each direction. But even if you're not into scripting at all, the simplicity that you have to create those add-ons can also serve you without you doing anything. And that's because the community is huge. There's a really vast community of people doing add-ons, a lot of individuals just doing something they think could be useful and usually just for them, and then they end up sharing it, and some of them can be really game changers. We will see one later that is really good. And in our field, I really encourage you to have a look at Ravish Nair's work. He has a website called digitalsculptors.com, and he shares nice tools that help bridge alias and Blender. It's mainly import-export helpers, but it can save a lot of time, and it's just easy and nice to connect both. Another great one is Stepper by Emby. So this guy used an open source NURBS kernel, and that lets you import and mesh step files directly from Blender, which is super cool because then you can just change the resolution of the meshing and play around with it, remesh it if you want. And there are tons of other ones, like other add-ons. And if you start looking out there, you can really find many that could make your process more efficient. There's many more stuff, many more amazing features that I love. And yeah, some of them are just not big enough to be significant enough to be illustrated. So I will just go quickly through those. Maybe there's something you like and that you may want to look more into it. So yeah, instances and file linking are really good. They help you keep small file size and make it much easier to collaborate with other people, centralize the work in only one file. For example, I use that on the wheels where there's a separate file with the wheel itself. I just bring it and then instantiate it around the car. VR is not really part of my process. I know that Blender has a feature called scene inspection, which is a way to look at your scene in VR. I tried it, but I think it's quite limited, and especially in terms of modeling. Rig animation and drivers are a lot of fun to play with. Yeah, they just let you give life to the vehicle, but the amount of things there is to say compared to the time I have is not worth diving into this. We talked quickly of vertex weight. We'll come back to it in a minute and also talk about the shape keys. Constraints are like modifiers, but on the object properties like position, rotation, they are nice to set up a file. And UV unwrapping is like the boring cousin of shading. It takes a lot of time. And if you just want something that looks nice and you want that quickly, there's other ways to just tweak your shaders in a way that you don't need to care about the UVs, but sometime you need to do that. So let's move on and talk about the future. Is Blender future-proof? Obviously, the answer is yes. And for me, there are three main areas that will grow and that us as car designers can make a really good use of. And the first one is parametric. And for that, I have two different ways to do parametric that I would like to show you. The first one is called tissue. So that's one of those one guy working in somewhere doing those nerdy stuff. And in the end, it's super useful. So it's so useful that now it's by default installed in Blender. You just need to activate it if you go in your preferences. So how it works, it's topology based, which means that you're very dependent on your mesh. But the concept is pretty cool. It basically replaces each polygon of your base mesh with one repetition of your pattern. This makes it very fast and easy to use. And once again, you can get very complex outputs for minimum effort. And it also supports those shape keys and vertex weight that we talked quickly about and that we will see later. But here is an example of how it works. So you can just pick the pattern that you want, pick the destination, and then you get a tessellation with your pattern. You can tweak the rotation so that it's correct. And then if you just add a modifier of mirror, then you have your full mesh, and this was no effort at all. And you can easily just change for another component, as they call them, which is the pattern itself. And even if you modify this one afterwards, you can just refresh and you get really quickly something quite cool and quite complex with, again, no effort, which I think is super nice in the iteration part, at least. Obviously, if you want to go further, you would need all the tools like Grasshopper probably. And yeah, here the same with a hexagonal pattern, which sounds more boring, but it's hiding a feature that we are going to see right now, which is those shape keys and vertex weights. So shape keys are one variation of where you put your control points. You can have many of them, and you can just have a slider to switch between them. And vertex weight is assigning a value to each vertex, and this will be the weight. And the cool thing here is that you can combine both, so the weight and the shape, the weight and the shape keys. And in that sense, you can then just control your shape key thanks to your vertex weight, which, again, for the amount of work it is to get there, maybe the result is not perfect, but it's still very, very cool, I think, to have that so simply. Second method is a bit more traditional. It's called geometry nodes. Again, nodes. Basically, Blender is doing this thing that they call everything nodes, where they try to make as many systems as they can with nodes to let you do more complex stuff, and also kind of automate it. Like, you can just change the input and you get the same thing that you wanted to do, but on that new input. This one is much closer to what you would find with Grasshopper. You have those like mathematical actions that you're doing on your inputs. You can connect those actions, grab property from here and there, and just get to the desired result. It's quite playful because you can define which input you have, and then just tweak from the menus and have a funny output. Like I have a client, for instance, where I did the geometry node tree and then gave it to them, and they could just tweak the settings and get what they wanted specifically without having to come back to me. I just move a slider and send back to them, which is pretty nice. You can see it here in action. I don't have the Boolean operation applied here because it's very performance intensive action. So you just have those hexagons going through the front hood. But yeah, you can see that there's this pattern that repeats and that we can rotate it, and that we have also this attractor. So the distance between that object and the pattern will control the size of the pattern and also like how it fades on the sides. This technique is really nice, but I think it's still quite early, and yeah, hopefully one day you will get much more control over the mesh itself and do proper procedural modeling, because right now it's more about placing stuff, and yeah, I think it's a bit limited, but it has a very, very bright future because Blender is putting a lot of effort in these systems, these nodal systems, and geometry nodes is quite recent. So let's see what it brings in the future. Another thing that Blender tried to push is doing some kind of smaller apps based on Blender. And for me, the perfect thing to use that would be to do a configurator. So that's what I'm developing these days. And yeah, the idea is that you could leverage some of Blender features to do specific application for like 3D printing, file conversion and everything. And yeah, for us in automotive, then this is the perfect way to just do a really nice configurator for reviews, or just something where you can have different variants of environment, rims, colors. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting, and it's still early as well. I'm still developing it. This is just a preview, but Yeah, it has a lot of potential, and I'm excited to finish it hopefully soon. And the third thing that will make Blender future-proof is the community, because it's already huge, but it's very welcoming. You can find tons of tutorials, tons of add-ons, and this community is really pushing the boundaries of what you can do with Blender on a daily basis. If you want to prove of that, you can check the Blender conference, which happens every year in Amsterdam, where you can watch people presenting real use cases of Blender and how they develop their workflow thanks to it. And it's very inspiring. You have people from Marvel explaining how they did some titles with it. And then there was a guy from Kiska. Kiska actually did two different presentations, one about the design process for the motorbikes with Blender, and one other one for just the visualization and how they do all the press renderings with Blender for KTM. Also, Tata Motors did one presentation in 2013 or something like that, quite early actually, or 15. And yeah, that's also interesting to see how they are using it there. So time to wrap up. I just have 2 slides before we get to the questions. The first thing I want to say didn't really fit in the other categories, but I want to talk quickly about hybrid workflows and examples of how we use Blender at Koenigsegg. One of the main one of them at least, was to use Blender in parallel with Alias sub-D. So we use that for parts where the flow is critical, like exhaust beats. The modeler who did that felt more comfortable doing those parts in Alias, but we could have also modeled it in Blender because it's still sub-D in the end. Personally, I prefer to use Blender when it comes to sub-D workflows because they have 30 years of experience making polygonal software. So the tool set is really good. But we still use Blender to do the thickness of it and check the thickness in a lot of areas, because you have some tools that allow you to do that in Blender. Another use case was the animation for the shifter mechanism. So there we had to take the CAD data from engineering, and we meshed it in Blender. We assigned all the materials that we then got into Keyshot, because the process there was mainly on Keyshot. And then we also did all the animation of each single screw and any part you can imagine there, so that we could do an exploded view that was dynamic. It was very, very cool to do that. And finally, the interior render that you can see down there. We also used Blender for the data preparation for the seats. So basically the pads were done in Blender, and then I did all of the UV mapping and everything so that we could have nice textures for the press renderings. And also a more hidden one is that all the carbon fiber that you see on the press release, at least the 3D images of the CC850, are actually the same carbon fiber that I showed you earlier. We just stopped the process of the shader before, like when it's generating the normal maps and stuff, and just took those normal maps in and brought them into Keyshot, so that we could get that carbon fiber material, which was really, really interesting. Main takeaways from all of that. Well, the first one is that Blender is not A-class. In the end, you still need, if you want to go production level for modeling and everything, you still need the expertise of a proper modeling team and really to have something perfect. But Blender is a lot of fun. You can add it to any workflow, whether it's at the center of it or if it's just a small step that makes only a small difference. It's always good to have it. It's very good for ideation. Like not knowing where you're going in Blender doesn't feel like you're losing time. The tools are really great to iterate with. It's a one-stop shop, so as we saw, you rarely need to get away from it as long as you're doing early design stuff. And there are tons of nerdy stuff to dig into. That's for me a very important point, because in the end, going into those rabbit holes, whether it's animation, scripting, shaders, anything, is just most of the time very, very fun. You're learning a lot, and everything you learn just bring more value to your process. So it's always nice. And if anything, I hope that it motivates you to try those stuff that you think are complicated, but in the end, it's quite easy, and there's a lot of documentation. Yeah, so thanks a lot for listening to me. I hope I didn't lose anyone on the way, and that everyone cannot wait to go install Blender and do cool stuff with it. Yeah, if you want the presentation, or if you have questions later, here's my email, but you can also go through Linkage. And if you have any question right now, then I'm more than happy to try answering them.
Yeah, that's Odie, fantastic job. That it is really powerful, and you know, very interesting examples. So
Thank you.
you've got people thinking about it. We've got a lot of good questions. So I'm gonna kind of act as your spokesperson or your conduit. And so I've got the questions that are coming in on the chat. So we'll just kind of go through them here. So the first one is, what is the Blender file format? Is it native to Blender, or do they use a different file format, or what?
Yeah, it's .blend, and it's just their own file format. It's actually quite good because first they have this thing where every time you save, it creates it just renames the previous file to blend1, blend2, blend blah 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 until like as much as you want in your settings, which means that you have always a save of the previous time that you saved. And inside of it, it's quite well organized, where you have collections, materials, and everything. Yeah, it's okay, but it's native, but you also can export obviously to FBX, OBJ.
Yeah. So that's the next question, and I think that is one of the ones that's pretty popular. Is you show a Blender to alias workflow. Tell us a little bit about how to export a Blender file to alias, or just what's the best workflow there.
So typically you need to use OBJ, because that's what alias can import as subd. So in that case, you need to remove the subdivision modifier in Blender, because you don't want this really high poly version. So then you just get those big polygons that once you will import in alias will be automatically smoothed out and having the subd layer on it basically. But yeah, it's just about sending an OBJ without subdivision to it. And there's also a problem with the scale and the orientation. That's mainly because of OBJ. So you need to scale the file up by 100. Yeah, 100, and change the forward to -y, I think.
Okay, got it. But if you say that you can save out as FBX, could you just save a file out of Blender as an FBX and then bring that in instead?
Yeah, you can just do that, but then you lose the subd aspect of it. But if you just care about having, like, I don't know, a set of rims just so that you can visualize what you're modeling in alias, but you don't care about modifying those wheels, then it's super easy to just send this FBX. Yeah.
Okay. So someone asked about your door cuts, and your door cuts were quite good. How did you do your door cuts?
Yeah, that's what I was explaining with the shrink wrap, where you just duplicate this model. You just do a closed model without any door cuts or anything. You duplicate that model. One of them, you just increase slightly the subdivision to a level of 4 or 5, and the other one is the one where you will cut all those door cuts. And so once you did this duplication, you always have a backup, which is the other one. So you can really you don't really care about the topology anymore, and you can start using the knife tool, which is K for the shortcut, and you can just start cutting through your model, define whatever edge you want. And the way I do it usually is just that once I cut through my model, I use the bevel tool, which is Control B. Then it will create more lines around that cut that you want. And this can let you control your groove, but also have like a safety edge basically, so that the reflection doesn't go crazy. And then
Okay.
you can just extrude inside and shrink wrap all of that to the main model.
Yeah. Well, things like that, and somebody asked about wheel, they liked your wheel presentation. Are there wheel tutorials, or are there door cut tutorials that you've created in the past, and are they available?
Not yet. I'm planning to do this kind of stuff because I think a lot of people could benefit from it. So
Sure.
yeah, that's one thing I want to do once. I mean, I was preparing a lot this presentation, but now I will focus on this kind of stuff.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's nice.
so it's coming.
So someone asked about scripts, and you talked about scripts to create marking menus.
Yeah.
Where do you go to get scripts? Like, are there scripts already available, and is there a library of scripts? Obviously, as you said, it's a sharing tool, or it's a enterprise-wide kind of access.
Yeah.
Where do you go to get scripts?
So the easiest place is probably the Blender Market, which is just this big platform where you can have assets, you can have materials, models, anything, and there's a big part just for scripts. So it's just Blender Market, and you can find most of the stuff there. Otherwise, there's a lot of independent developers just putting stuff on Gumroad.
Cool. So if you just go to the Blender website, there's the Blender Market is there.
No, they are a separate entity. They are not connected. So you just need to type in Blender Market.
Got it. Okay.
Actually, my marking menus are on the Blender Market and on Gumroad, but if you get them on Gumroad, they're for free. So I would rather do that.
Yeah. So somebody asked about the DLO or the windscreen, or was that built in SubDs?
Yeah, everything is done in Blender here. It's fully polygonal. There's nothing from Alias. So it's also the same same workflow where I do this shrink wrap thing like I do for the doors, and I just do that, but splitting the different parts of the DLO.
Okay, got it. That would be another nice tutorial, things like that. Just like little workflow things. So Odie, one of the things that we see requested from a lot of customers is, the interesting thing about visualizing in VRAD is you don't really have the ability to modify it in this real-time session. Can you make model tweaks or modifications in the real-time mode, or do you have to jump out of that, make the changes, and then go back in again?
No, that's what I was showing. Wait, I need to go back to it, but that was there. Oh no, wait. There. So yeah, basically here the screenshot that you see is just that. It's just a screenshot of my viewport in Blender. So that's not rendered, that's not ray traced, that's purely the real-time engine, just with one light. And you can see that here I'm editing the door. So that's how you can work directly with those nice reflection and everything.
Yeah.
Also, you can see here that you can see how the topology is not as clean as you would want it if you really had to control the reflection. Since the shrink wrap is taking care of it, you have those weird triangles and stuff, which are not a problem here.
Yeah, that's cool. So we're looking at your screen right now. It looks like you have a small window in front of.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
That's the chat.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so now we see it. So you can make modifications in the real-time mode. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a couple of others, or I'll just kind of someone asked, there was so much covered here. Is any of this available on YouTube or other forums?
For a specific part of it, or for just this presentation being available? Because as I think you're recording it. So.
Yeah, not just this presentation, but just Blender workflows in general and tutorials and things like that. I think with Blender, as you said, it's a pretty vast community. So I would expect there's a lot of content out there.
Yeah, it's a bit trickier for what we do specifically because we care about things that other industries don't really care about. But yeah, I will, at least one of my objectives is to do more of those explanation videos and for free,
Yeah.
probably on
Yeah.
YouTube and stuff. So if you're patient, maybe.
Okay, no problem. We've got a little bit of time. We have a question. Hang tight. Just bear with me. Okay, so somebody asked a good question, like, do you think you think somebody will add NURBS capabilities within Blender in the future?
No, that's
No?
unfortunate, but no, basically the problem is that the founder of Blender, who is still very much involved in the development and everything, the original creator of it, he's the one who coded the first NURBS features, but he really doesn't care about NURBS. So he doesn't plan to bring anything more. There was one guy in 2014. There's this thing called Google Summer of Camp, where you have open source project being worked on by students and everything. And that guy tried to bring like trimmed NURBS, and he was able to import 3DM, so Rhino files into Blender and having the tessellation correct and everything. But this never made it to the main branch of Blender. So I don't think we'll see NURBS modeling tool, especially because you need to change really the core of the kernel. You cannot just do an add-on because
Sure.
that wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, that's a good point. It creates a much more complicated workflow. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, the beauty of Alias and some of the other tools are specifically, as you were saying, there are certain common math libraries, right?
Yeah.
So once you start to do that, with Rhino or whatever, you got to put in a whole new math library, which gets tricky. Yeah. So someone asked about, will this session be up on YouTube? I expect so. Yeah, it'd probably be on the Linkage page, or but we're gonna make this recording available to all of you. So we'll put it up on Dropbox, and then you can just download it from Dropbox. And as soon as probably the next couple of days, we'll kind of edit it a little bit and then put it up on Drop. Give a link to everybody who's attending the event. Yeah.
A Discord server. There was a spark of that with one guy from Ford in Shanghai, where we started that, but we are just two in the server. So sorry, Sonia, not at least not that I know of, no Discord server, but we can do one if you want.
Okay. Well, cool. So any other questions out there that people want to just voice instead of just using the chat? Just go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. Hey, Odie, Matthew here.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. There's no clear description on Blender's site or in their help on what exactly the modeling type it is. Like we hear, mesh modeling, polygonal modeling, subdivision surface modeling. We know that there's NURBS, curves, and some functionality in there. There's also Bezier. What how would it be defined? Because people ask that, they're like, well, it can interact with these different things, but what at its core is it? Like, for example, in Alias, they have a subdivision modeling tool set in there, but at its core, it's NURBS that's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. So basically Bezier NURBS, that's the same thing. Like NURBS just stands for non-uniform rational Bezier splines. So that's what Alias does. What Blender does is polygonal modeling, which is you have just those control points, and then there's a way to smooth that out based on algorithm that are called Kaltmull-Clark, I think. And so those are the two main approaches. When Alias brought this sub-D workflow. That's basically them converting the polygonal smoothing, but instead of just adding more smaller polygons that smooth out the shape, you generate a NURB surface for each patch. So you kind of do an in-between the two. So it's different, like the subdivision modeling that you do in Blender, it looks exactly the same as the one in Alias, but in the end, the one in Blender is just smaller polygons, whereas in Alias, it's perfect surfaces in the sense that it's like vectors. You can just zoom in and it's still good. Blender is more like the Photoshop, and Alias is Illustrator.
Yeah, that's good analogy. Well, listen, everybody, our time is up. And so thank you, Odie, once again. Thank you so much for working on this and presenting it to us at the late hour in Amsterdam. And, you know,
Yeah.
your presentation was fantastic, you know, especially
Thanks a
with
lot.
the accent. Everything just sounds more exotic, you know.
Thanks.
So
was a pleasure.
once again, thanks everybody for joining. And like I said, we'll make it available, the recording available soon. Okay?
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Great presentation.
Yeah, it was
Good job.
awesome. Take care.
Bye.